Welcome everyone to the Q with Q. It's me, your political best friend, Quentin R. Giles, or you can just call me Q. Today I have a very special show for you, and I've been thinking about this one subject for a while now, and it seems to pop up in our consciousness every couple of years, but I think it is going to be very pervasive going forward. And that's reparations, okay? Let's talk about the reparations. It's always been a taboo topic, especially when we talk about the US government paying Black people. There seems to be a lot of white fragility around it. And then there also seems to be some pushback, a small minority of people within our own Black community. So I wanted to take time to talk about reparations, what it is, why we want it, and why we deserve it. But before we get started, can we talk about how the killers of Breonna Taylor are still on the loose and not a single charge has been levied against these police officers, knowing that what they did was wrong? I don't know who we need to talk to, because clearly, the AG in Kentucky is not trying to do anything. There has been a national uproar about this. Even celebrities like Beyonce have written him a letter, and he's issued a statement that he will not be bullied by celebrities. Now, I don't know that anyone is trying to bully him. I think what we're all trying to do is have a call of action. And what we want is justice for Breonna, because they murdered that woman. Now let's get into the show. So what is reparations? Reparations is compensation for an injury or some type of abuse. And why do Black people want reparations? Well, obviously because of slavery. We all know the atrocities of slavery. We know of the atrocities of the Jim Crow era. We know the atrocities of segregation. And we also know that none of those things are correct. We also know that Black people were cheated out of their 40 acres and a mule. And I know I have some white viewers here and some other allied viewers that don't know exactly what 40 acres and a mule were. But we Black people have always known what 40 acres and a mule was. So let me tell you what 40 acres and a mule was. 40 acres and a mule was a promise to the freed slave that the government was going to give them 40 acres of land plus a mule. Well, I went and did a little bit more research so we can unpack that and actually find out where that came from. So after the Civil War, when the Union defeated the Confederacy, and the Union is the United States of America, and they defeated the traitors, the Confederacy, there was an agreement called the Field Order 15. Now, what happened during this Field Order 15, some Union, or let's just say America, because that's who they were. We only say Union so we could separate the Union from the Confederacy, and since the Confederacy lost, we'll just say America, okay, for the sake of just being consistent. American leadership met with some Black preachers and some Black leaders and decided that they were going to come together and figure out what is it that the freed Black man wanted, the freed Black man and woman. What did they want now that the Civil War was over, now that slavery had been abolished? What was it? So they came together to draft the Field Order 15. Now, one of the Black leaders was Reverend Carson Frizzell, and I apologize to him and his descendants if I butchered that last name, was asked by the American government, what do you want? To be integrated and live among the white people, or to go off and be on your own? And the Black leader chose for Black people to go off and be on their own. And his reasoning was that, quote, there was extreme prejudice in the South and it would take years to overcome. Now, what's shameful is what he said is still very true today in 2020. So January 16th, 1865, Field Order 15 was signed. And what that basically said was the captured land from the Confederacy, the land that was captured from them after they were defeated, were to be given to the Black freed man. And it was supposed to be divvied up by 40 acres. Every family was to get 40 acres of that land to go and live in peace and prosper. Now, where the mule came from, the mule was actually not in the order, but apparently there were like some leftover army mules that some Black people got. So over the years, the term 40 acres and a mule got adopted. But originally, we weren't promised in this order a mule, but you know, some people got a little mule. And so at this point, I'm pretty sure the Black people were like, okay, bet, we're gonna have a little land, we can grow our own crops, we can do our own thing, we can govern ourselves accordingly. Because remember, they had just said they didn't really want to integrate with the white people because of the barbaric nature of the white people at that time. I mean, could you blame them? Now, in comes the shady part, because I'm sure you're wondering, well then, why are y'all complaining? Why do you want reparations? Because Black people never got the 40 acres. After President Lincoln's assassination in April of '65, that is just a few months after Field Order 15 was signed, President Andrew Johnson actually reversed the order and gave the land back to the Confederate traitors. So picture being the black man. You fought in the war. You think that you have your freedom. You've established this agreement that you're going to get some land. The traders are going to be moved. The president who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed you, now assassinated after you've been given land. And the very next president comes in and reverses the order and gives the land back to the traders, which then left many of freed black people to work as sharecroppers for former slave owners. I mean, the dark, twisted irony of it all. Now, here's where you're gonna gag, because I definitely gagged. Although black people got the land promised to them, taken from them, do you know who was actually receiving some type of reparations? Do you know? White slave owners actually received types of reparations. 3 years prior to Field Order 15 being signed and President Lincoln still being alive, in 1862, he signed a bill that gave $300 for every slave to every slave owner. That $300 then equates to over $7,000 today. And the largest payout for freed slaves was $18,000 then, which equates to over $400,000 for human bodies. And it wasn't in just America that slave owners got some type of reparations. They did the same thing in England. They did the same thing in France and actually punished the Haitian people for the uprising that liberated Haiti. And so in exchange for formal recognition that Haiti was the first independent black Western society, they had to pay French former slave owners, which put that place in such a crippling financial circumstance for decades. So when you start thinking about why Haiti is so destitute and desolate, this is why. Now let's come on back to America, because that's who we're talking about right now, trying to put it into perspective for black people and reparations. This idea of reparations is not new. Even back then, black folks were fighting for it, but the vast amount of Americans were against it. But you know what they were for? Do you know what they were for? They supported a $100,000 removal fund. That $100,000 back then equates to $2.5 million today to send black people to Haiti and Liberia. Now, we're talking about people who were born into slavery, who were here already, no fault of their own, and instead of wanting to pay them for the pain and destruction you caused, you rather pay to send them to a country that they've never been to, that they don't know, all based on the color of their skin. Side note, sounds a lot like the DACA kids. And so I know what you're thinking. This is absolutely horrible that the American government would pay slave owners, but they haven't paid reparations to anybody else. So how can we say black people deserve reparations even after all of that? Well, I'm glad you're thinking it. Actually, America has paid reparations to other people outside of slave owners. They've paid reparations to the Japanese community. From 1942 to 1945, there were things called Japanese internment camps. Now, these camps came into place after the bombing at Pearl Harbor. America freaked out and basically rounded up all Japanese Americans or Japanese descendants and put them in camps because they didn't know if it was going to be espionage going on or what. No evidence against these people, only based on the fact that you were Japanese, you had to be removed and placed essentially in jail. The U.S. rounded an estimated 117,000 Japanese Americans and put them in jail. They falsely imprisoned them based on fear. And seeing as how America is always the leader, they weren't the only ones that did it. Canada and Mexico joined in on the fun and locked up Japanese immigrants there as well. Now, about 40 years after these Japanese internment camps ended, Congress, the American government, actually issued an apology to the Japanese community. And not only did they issue an apology, a formal apology, meaning in writing, they paid out some reparations. Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act in 1988. I want you to remember that. In 1988, they passed this act for Japanese descendants that were in those internment camps. And they paid out $20,000 to each Japanese descendant. It's estimated that about 80,000 Japanese descendants received this $20,000. Now, why do I really want you to remember that 1988 decision by the Congress? Well, one, it was a year before I was born, and that's crazy. But in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. Who was at the forefront of the Civil Rights Act? Who pushed for the Civil Rights Act? Black people. So you mean to tell me that Somewhere in the American conscience, we had moved towards a place where we agreed and affirmed that civil rights was for every single person. Everybody should have civil rights and should not be discriminated against based on their color. And yet you still deny Americans, Black Americans, reparations. However, you paid Japanese Americans for the suffer and the pain they went through for 3 to 4 years, but not the 400 years of systemic oppression and dismantling of the Black body and family. Can somebody make this make sense to me? This continues to show that the American consciousness as a whole continues to downgrade and downplay Black hurt and pain. And it is astonishing to me that in 2020, we are still having this conversation. Now, I've heard people argue that, it's so many Black people in America now, like America just could not afford it, like it would go bankrupt. Okay, well, boo-hoo. Baby, had you gave them people they 40 acres and a mule back then, we wouldn't be here asking for it today. And who knows what would have come from those Black people getting that. Black people might have been in a better economic standing today. But no, America has systematically and historically devalued and dehumanized Black people and their experiences. And we are simply saying no more. Give us our just due. Issue a formal apology that the American government did something wrong. I believe we've all agreed to it. I don't know why the government still has not done this. Now, I don't expect them to do it under the age of Trump, but when we get a President Biden in there, a formal apology needs to be issued. How do we ever think that we're going to get to a place of racial reconciliation if you, the American public, won't recognize what you did? And I say that being an American myself, but how can we, how? If I do something to you and I just move on like nothing happened while all the while you're hurt, how can we ever reconcile? How can we be friends and move forward? Like, that just doesn't make sense. So the American government needs to issue a formal apology and pay some reparations. We want our money too. So how do we get there? Right now, there is a bill in Congress that was introduced by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, which is called H.R. 40. Now, H.R. 40 is Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act. Now, what does this do? It would establish a commission examining slavery and discrimination in the colonies and in the U.S. from 1619 to present and recommend appropriate remedies. It will also look into identifying the role that state and federal governments played in supporting the institution of slavery. It will also identify forms of discrimination in the public and private sectors against freed slaves and their descendants. And it will identify lingering negative effects of slavery on living African Americans and society. Now, this is just a bill that has not been voted on. I don't know why, especially with the Democrats having power in Congress. So I'm really not too sure why it's not been voted on to even move forward. And we all know how a bill goes to become a law. So we remember I'm just a bill. Yeah, I'm just a bill. We've got that part. But H.R. 40 is a bill right now. And so what we need our local congressmen and what we need our state senators to do is to support H.R. 40, to actually study and examine these things. We've done it for slave owners, for the people who owned human beings, for the people who hung Black bodies, for the people who raped Black men and women. Okay? That was a thing. There was a thing called buck breaking, where they would rape the biggest Black man to show that he didn't have dominance in front of the rest of the village. And well, I don't know if I want to call it a village, amongst the rest of the slaves. Raping Black women getting beat by white women for being raped, their children being killed, like all types of atrocities that we have learned. And I know some new allies are still learning. We paid those people. We paid those people as an American society. We paid the Japanese descendants for the atrocity of those internment camps and have issued a formal apology, but we have not done it for Black people. And that is crazy, because one thing about American society is it loves Black culture, but it does not love the Black body. And so this is one of the steps that we can take for a racial reconciliation. And I urge all of you to support H.R. 40, to pressure your congressman and your senator to support it as well. And we're going to put pressure on a new Joe Biden presidency to support it as well, because we know we're not going to get it from Trump. So I thank you all for being here. And until next time, this is The Q with Q, and I'm here for you. Oh, that just rhymed. I'm a rapper now.